Welcome to Mobile Suit Gundam Crossfire, or Target in Sight if you're outside the US. Released alongside the PS3 as a launch title in 2006, the game received less than stellar reviews. Bland graphics, janky controls, texture pop-in issues, these were all pretty big problems, but paled in comparison to the absolutely horrendous performance. Like, I know that sometimes it's hard to tell how smoothly a game is running over YouTube, but just look at this footage of the game running natively on a PS3. It's no surprise the game received the reviews it did. That frame rate is horrid. If it weren't for this little thing called emulation, Crossfire would have been doomed to always be presented in this awful state, never getting the opportunity to show off its full potential. Don't get me wrong, the game is still far from perfect, but with the much better performance you can achieve now via RPCS3, it makes the game actually playable. I was skeptical going into it, but now, I think Crossfire is probably the most underrated Gundam game that exists. Let's find out why. So first, let's talk a little bit about just what Crossfire is. We're going to omit story here because there isn't really one to speak of. At the very start of the game, you do get a brief cutscene that sort of sets up the situation at hand, but until you reach the very end of your playthrough, that's pretty much all there is. If you're already familiar with the story of 0079 and the original anime, this isn't too big of a deal, but it definitely feels like there could have been more. The general lack of any other sort of cutscenes happening as major events play out on Earth definitely leaves the game feeling a bit unpolished, or maybe even unfinished in this regard. But moving on, if I had to pick just a few words to describe what Crossfire is, I would say it's a one-year war simulator. It actually gives me pretty big Federation vs. Zeon vibes, which in my opinion is one of the greatest Gundam games of all time. The overall setup is remarkably similar. At the beginning, you choose which faction you're going to fight for, the Federation or Zeon. You progress through the timeline of the war, taking place in various battles as a typical run-of-the-mill pilot, although notably, Crossfire doesn't put you in those major battles, and its campaign ends before the fight moves off-planet. You unlock more advanced suits as you progress. Suit repair isn't instantaneous and requires passing in-game time for it to occur. Yeah, you get the point. With just a little more time in the oven though, I really think this could have been one of the franchise's best titles. This setting, the one-year war, and the idea of progressing through it in a gritty, difficult Gundam simulator, all while being just a grunt in a GM or Zaku that has to earn his right to survive, is something that Gundam fans have always dreamed of, and something that's been noticeably absent since really the PS2 era of Gundam games. Crossfire almost gives us that dream game, but it just doesn't quite hit the mark, the one that would make it truly great. Okay, let's talk gameplay. First, we'll go over the sort of basic loop that you'll find yourself in while playing. After choosing your side and naming your character, you're first thrown into a sort of introductory mission. If you're fighting for Zeon, this will be a defense mission where you fight back against some armor and mobile suits, and on the flip side, the first Federation mission sees you testing out a GM. From here is where the game really opens up. Basically, what you get is a menu where you can manage mobile suits, order new ones, and choose missions to play. The most important aspect of this intermission menu though is the date in the upper right hand corner. As you perform actions like repairing, which happens automatically post-mission, order new suits, upgrades, etc., in order to actually complete any of those things, you have to proceed to the next turn. Doing so advances the date of the endgame world. As you progress further into the war, events happen, missions become available, missions that haven't been completed in time become unavailable, and eventually the war will end. So you really have a set number of turns to complete the missions the game offers. We'll come back here and touch on the specifics of some of these other elements, like ordering mobile suits and customization, a bit later, but for now, let's move on to actual in-mission gameplay, because for me, this is by far the highlight of Crossfire. Realistic, challenging, and at times, hilarious. That's how I would describe this game. Depending on the initial difficulty setting you choose, it can also be outright hard at times. I chose the normal option for my initial playthrough as Xeon, and while things started off fairly easily, things escalated quickly. By the time I was like 8 or 9 missions in, some missions felt like insurmountable walls that I was just banging my head against repeatedly. There were some extremely close calls. I'm talking like 1% HP remaining close. Although I think a lot of this just comes down to being unfamiliar with the game. For instance, it wasn't until I was probably like 10 missions in or so that I realized you could double tap X to boost continuously on the ground, which is a huge boost to mobility, and there are also other gameplay nuances that you sort of just adjust to the more you play, like the angles you want to strafe at when fighting enemies in order to avoid their fire, when to close distance for melee attacks, and more. Of course, the big standout for gameplay here, and what really sets Crossfire apart from the majority of all other Gundam titles, is the realistic damage system. As you take and dish out damage, you'll routinely see parts flying off mobile suits. Arms, shields, legs, heads, they can all be destroyed and negatively impact the affected suit. Although actual suit destruction only comes when the center torso is destroyed. So it's pretty normal to find enemies, or even yourself for that matter, running around with an arm or head missing. Generally speaking, this is something you'll want to avoid, since losing an arm will cost you the ability to use any weapons that require it, and being without primary armament is, a lot of the time, a death sentence. But it's more than just your main weapons that can be lost. If your suit uses that arm for accessing its melee weapon, you'll no longer be able to do that either, and instead, you'll find yourself punching or kicking enemies in close range. Which, yeah, seeing a goof running around missing its arms and head and just kicking GMs in the shins until they die is certainly a sight to behold. In addition to your arms costing you access to weaponry, losing your head will knock out sensors, and while you can't truly lose your legs, if they do get blacked out, you'll find yourself walking excruciatingly slow, which basically guarantees your death since you won't be able to dodge incoming enemy fire. I'm really a big fan of this limb destruction system. Hacking apart enemy suits is super satisfying, and at the same time, it adds real weight and consequence to the game's combat. The possibility of taking a short burst of fire to your arm and having it subsequently get blown off really makes you think about your actions, especially in the beginning of your run, which, as I mentioned earlier, I started off as Xeon, and it was one thing once I got to the later suits, like the Dom or Gelgoog, which really could take a decent amount of punishment, but in the beginning, the earlier suits could be quite fragile. That's not to say they weren't effective though. My Zaku 2 was with me for quite a long time, and I actually found that the classic Zaku MG was a very effective weapon. Really, all the ballistic-based weapons were great, mostly due to the fact that they have a sort of homing effect going on where they tend to curve a bit towards the enemy. This is even more true for suits that have multiple ballistic weapons, like the Goof or even the GM, because there's nothing stopping you from firing multiple weapons simultaneously. This allows you to really quickly melt targets. Alright, let's move on to how you actually unlock new suits and how customization is handled. When you complete a mission, you're rewarded a certain amount of points based on the mission's base payout and your performance. The more missions you play, the more of these points you'll accumulate. When it comes to spending these, you have 3 options. The first is customization. Via the hangar, you can upgrade suits you already own, with there being 4 available categories to choose from: attack, weapon, defense, and then there's also a change type option. Attack and defense are the most straightforward. The more points you sink into these, the more effective the selected suit will be when it comes to dishing out and tanking damage. The weapon category is a little bit more nuanced, as spending points here will allow you to unlock additional weapons to use for your suit or increase your weapon's ammo capacity. For example, by default, the Dom comes equipped with a bazooka, but if you spend some points here, you can unlock an MG to use. Change type is the final option, and the most unique, as this isn't really somewhere you can just go and continuously invest points to upgrade a unit. Instead, this allows you to swap between different variations of a suit. like Heavy, which will increase attack and defense but lower boost time, or different biome-specific variations, like Jungle or Desert, which will increase the effectiveness of the suit on a specific map region. Keep in mind too that these upgrades come quite literally one day at a time, just like repairs post-mission. So when you upgrade a unit, it'll be unavailable until the next day when upgrades are complete. The other currency sinks come in the form of ordering new pilots and new mobile suits via the supply menu. As you progress further and further into your campaign, new ones will become available to order. At first, it will seem like this is pretty limited and that you won't have a lot of options, but trust me, the selection of both suits and pilots available is really quite impressive. Just about anything from the 1-year war, and then some, is available. From your basic stuff like Zaku's, GMs, Goofs, and gun cannons, to more advanced units like the RX-78 itself, which is blatantly OP by the way, as it should be, Shiro's EZ-8, and even the Kampfer and Zamel. The pilots that eventually become available for hire too are equally impressive. It's a huge list, and you'll recognize tons of iconic characters from shows that revolved around the 1-year war. Just keep in mind that unlocking a lot of these more elite pilots requires completing the campaign on higher difficulties, so you may not get them on your first go-around. Which completion of a run through either the Federation or Xeon version of the campaign will probably take you anywhere between 4 to 6 hours, depending on what difficulty you select. Progressing through said campaign is fairly straightforward. As time progresses, new missions become available for you to then attempt to complete. You complete as many as possible until you reach your faction's final mission. Which I just want to reiterate what I mentioned earlier, that if you don't do a mission in time, it will simply become unavailable. There's no real penalty for this as far as I could tell, but skipping missions isn't something you want to be doing since you really need as many points as possible in order to best upgrade your suits for the best chance of success. Because I'll tell you, that final mission is definitely not easy.
Federation forces severely outnumber us. Set up here and pick off individual enemies. We must wear the Federation forces down to win. Stop the Federation assault! Hold them back! Use your gun! Melee combat comes later!
Reinforcements are approaching.
Use the terrain to get a bead on the enemy.
Reinforcements are approaching. Air forces approaching. Watch the skies. Reinforcements are approaching.
No! Ah!
Reinforcements are approaching.
Ah!
Enemy force eliminated. Reinforcements negative. It looks like we've eliminated the assault force.
To all units, our forces have succeeded in repelling the enemy assault and defended the mining base. We've dealt the Federation a heavy blow, from which they won't likely recover. Our forces are still in a difficult situation, but if we fight with faith in our cause, there is no battlefield we cannot conquer. I repeat, we've successfully defended the mining base. The Federation forces have lost.
Upon completing the campaign, you get a nice little overview that shows the outcome of events that took place in the war, as well as an overall record score and your achieved pilot rank. You're then thrown right into the start of a new campaign on the next difficulty level, and you get to keep all the suits you unlocked, so subsequent runs definitely are a lot easier despite the higher difficulty. Overall, the gameplay of Crossfire is really its sole selling point. With the enhanced performance granted by Emulation, the game goes from something that I would probably never touch natively on a PS3 to something that I really enjoyed playing through. It definitely does have a bit of jank going on during combat at times, and the AI, both enemy and allied, is pretty awful, but I think the satisfying combat more than makes up for it. Oh boy. Presentation. I'm not going to sugarcoat this, the entire presentation of Crossfire as a whole is pretty awful. Well, maybe awful is a bit unfair, but it's definitely below average at best. The graphics are some of the worst we've seen from a PS3 title that we've covered on the channel, the color palette is completely washed out, and the intermission menu, where you spend a huge chunk of your time in between missions, is just very bland and a chore to navigate, especially when you're managing and upgrading multiple suits and pilots. Also, why for the love of God did so many devs for early 7th gen titles think it was a good idea to use this Comic Sans ass font? I really don't get it. But yeah, the game definitely hasn't aged well, and even at the time of release, this wasn't a pretty game. Even the audio just sort of misses the mark. So many of the previous gen's Gundam titles had killer soundtracks and sound effects that were ripped straight from the anime, which really helped with the immersion and authenticity factor. None of that is found here. I will be fair though and say that some of the original soundtracks are decent, but the sound effects while in mission, it's almost like they're just completely generic effects. They get the job done, but that's about all they do. At times, it almost feels like I was playing a mod of some game where some fans threw together a 0079 simulator, which, don't get me wrong, if someone did that, I'd play the hell out of it, but come on, I just feel like there was so much potential here, and it was wasted. To summarize, I think Crossfire is a game that really could have been something that was truly special. Its overall premise is great, it's just the execution that's lacking. I think if the game had had better performance on the PS3 back in the day, it may have been received slightly better, because with the better performance offered by Emulation, it does turn the gameplay into something that I think is honestly a lot of fun. There's tons of suits, pilots, and weapons to unlock, offering good replay value that rewards you for playing through its campaign multiple times. If you're a fan of this setting, I would recommend checking Crossfire out, despite some of its shortcomings. Let me know your thoughts on the game down below, and as always, thanks for watching. Until next time.